Hey everybody, welcome back to part two for jXchange OAuth, and this is in regards to our banks and credit unions. If you are a fintech, you're welcome to listen in, but today's video we're going to be covering a few things that are really specific to our banks and credit unions. We're going to talk briefly about fintech readiness. We're also going to look at the admin portal and talk about how to set up these new configurations. And then we'll also talk about at the end how you can contact Jack Henry for assistance. So first off, let's talk about fintech readiness. If you have a fintech who says, hey, I'm ready to get jXchange OAuth credentials, there's a couple of things that they have to do. Just as a reminder, here are the dates that are associated with the migration to OAuth that all of our API consumers need to be aware of. So right now, this OAuth integration is available, and fintechs should be working with Jack Henry in the DMZ environment, which is a shared sandbox for Jack Henry. And really, they can begin installing this in production environments as soon as they are ready. So we have kind of an internal tracking process here at Jack Henry whenever fintechs have completed their work effort to consume the OAuth security model. If you're using an internally developed product, you can actually begin setting that up immediately in your own environment. There's no reason for you to go through some sort of certification or validation process. However, we will be doing that for our fintech partners who are a member of the vendor integration program. But the expectation, again, is that by April of 2026, all new installs will be required to use OAuth. And then April of 2028, every current integration that's using the existing security model today is expected to be migrated over fully. And so the fintechs really should be working right now on adopting OAuth and getting ready for that April 2028 deadline to get everybody moved over, and of course, April 2026 to get any new installs completed. One thing to note here that these jXchange environments hosting the OAuth security model are cloud hosted in GCP. They are entirely new environments from what we have today, and so we may need some additional network communication work to be completed. So, if you submit a case and request the OAuth credentials, it might add a little bit of time just to get those set up for all of the communication work to be completed. All right, let's shift gears a little bit and let's look at the admin portal where the institutions will be able to set up these credentials. So overall, let's talk a little bit about the Jack Henry Identity project. The goal of Jack Henry Identity is for it to become the central identity store for all of our products, along with the central place for API credentials. You will notice in the screenshot that the URL that I'm looking at here is banno.com. And if you are a Banno customer today, you are likely familiar with this portal. You will just go to log in, and there will be a set of credentials that you will be issued to sign into that portal. I will say that if you are a non-Banno customer, you will not have access to this portal at first. There will be a project to get your institutions added into the back office for you to begin issuing client credentials. At some point, this will shift to a more one Jack Henry look and feel. It will no longer be banno.com, but for now, this is the portal that we have. Again, you can still get access to this portal even if you're not a Banno customer. It just requires some additional setup on the Jack Henry side, and we can help you with that. You will need at least one administrator at the bank or credit union. We like to start off with one, and then you're always welcome to invite additionals at the bank. You certainly want to have more than one, just in case your administrator decides to take PTO or wins the lottery and decides to quit their job. So there will be some effort there to get you established with a single administrator, and then you can go on from there. All right, let's dive in a little bit into the configuration. We'll show you screenshots of the admin portal UI and kind of go through the step-by-step process for what you need to do to configure a new application. Okay, so before we really dive into those screenshots, though, I do want to talk about, from a high level, there are these three topics in regards to Jack Henry Identity. The first is users. So you have users who can be employee users at the bank or credit union. You have Jack Henry user accounts. Jack Henry itself has our own kind of access, but You can also invite Jack Henry users to your institution to be able to sign in as your institution into different applications. And then you also have this concept of service accounts where there's not a true user behind the keyboard. This is used by applications as kind of an association between the application and your institution. The next topic we have is groups. So groups are intended to be used for user organization and user authorization. And so you can group users. You can think of this as like an Active Directory group, kind of where you might have a group that's assigned for all of your tellers who need certain permissions, and they all require kind of that same level of authorization. You could create groups who really don't have any sort of permissions apart from just they need to be able to authenticate. And then, of course, you have groups that are like administrators who can come in here and complete these configuration steps that we're about to go over to set up new external apps, to invite other users to the organization, that sort of thing. And then lastly, you have this external apps concept. The external apps are just API credentials, and there are two different types of applications you can configure. You can configure service applications, which again, that's more of your client credential flow, where you are, you're issuing a client ID and giving that product application to APIs. And then your standard application is more, it's using the authorization code flow where it requires somebody at the keyboard to sign in with their user account at the institution level to then be able to get back an access token to make additional calls. As far as jXchange goes, this is only a service application, so no need for standard application. So that's what we'll really be focusing on these next few slides. So when you go to banner.com and you sign in, you'll see a screen similar to what you see on the left here. There's these three little dots on the menu. You'll click that, and then you'll see users and groups. You'll want to go into users and groups, and the very first thing you'll want to do is create a group. And this group can be named whatever makes the most sense to you. For me, I've created one that's called JX OAuth Consumer. This is just to keep it organized, and every jXchange consumer application I'm configuring, I'll end up adding a service account user to this group. There really is no permissions that I've allowed in this group. If you were to scroll down in the screen, I know this is just a screenshot, but as you scroll down, you'll see a bunch of different permissions that are available. I haven't selected any of those really because I don't require those permissions. I strictly am looking for authentication only. And so the next thing I'll do after I create that group, I will go into this process of inviting a user. Now, this user traditionally is an email address, a valid email address, where somebody would have to go register for an account. They would receive an invite email to go register for that account. However, with a service account, I'm really not needing a valid email, but it does need to end in .com just so that validation takes place on the back end. And so right here, I've got this kind of formula that I'm using for these accounts that you can see in the screenshot on the left. And then you can see where I've selected my group authorization down below that as the JX OAuth consumer. And once I've done that, I can click send invite. Again, it's a little misleading because you're not really expected to get that email at a particular email inbox to then register. It's just kind of associating or adding the user to the institution. Once you've done that part on the user, you can go to your external apps and add a new external application. Again, the name is free format. I would highly recommend that you follow a naming standard similar to what I have here as far as vendor, product, JX OAuth. So if you're working with a Jack Henry product, it would be JHA or JH, and then whatever product name it is, Synergy, for example, JX OAuth. Whatever makes sense to you. Again, it is free format. It really doesn't have any bearing on the application or how it works, but it needs to make sense to you as the administrator at the bank or credit union. And then down below, you'll see the authentication method, or first of all, before I go into that, the application type should always be a standard, a service account. Standard is where you get into the authorization code flow, where there's supposed to be a person at the keyboard who performs login to get back a token. we're going to use the service account in this situation. And the only authentication method, sorry, is signed jot. This requires a public key to be provided to you to be able to set this up. So that's kind of step one. If you have an internally developed application, or even if you're working with a fintech and they say, hey, I need JX OAuth credentials, the very first thing you're going to need is the public key to assign to this application. You can provide that either in the form of a PIN key, as you see here in the screenshot, or a JWOX URL. And then lastly, once you've entered that key, you'll see the associated user. Sorry, not lastly quite yet, but the next thing is the associated user. You will add that service account that you just invited to the institution. That'll be kind of that association between the client and the user. And then lastly, you'll see at the very bottom here, this concept of scopes. Now, I will say that this is a new feature. It may not be enabled for your institution right off the bat. So right off the bat, this is not necessarily required, but when this does get enabled, you will have to come in here and add additional scopes that are authorized for each client. You can see here in the list, I've already got OpenID, which is kind of a standard default, will always be there. And then I've added the jackhenry.com JX Service Gateway Write scope that is required for anything Service Gateway. So when you click Add Scopes, you'll see on the screenshot on the left, kind of the pop-up window that will list all of the potential scopes that you can add. There is a search bar. You can filter down by jXchange and then select jXchange, Write, and then allow scopes. And then the final screenshot here is essentially after you have added the scope and you click Save, that's when you'll be returned to the previous screen where you see all of your external apps. You'll have to go back into the external app you just created to retrieve this client ID that is highlighted in the screenshot on the right. That client ID is then returned to whatever consumer so that they can make the token request to get back access tokens. Again, if you're building something yourself, you have your own internal developed application, you'll need that for your application. Now that you've created a client ID, you have that available to you, you will need to provide that to Jack Henry to be able to authorize that to the APIs. So what we've just done is we have created the client that can then get tokens back from Jack Henry identity. However, it really has nothing to do with the authorization apart from the scope. So they have to have the scope to be able to make a jXchange call. But the specific APIs, such as customer inquiry or account addition, those APIs are still authorized at the jXchange level, and that has to still be performed by a Jack Henry team. So you need to open a case and provide the client ID to Jack Henry in order to authorize that client to specific APIs. You will also need to tell them if this is an internally developed application, you will also need to inform them which APIs you need access to. Again, everything I've just shown you regarding the configuration, while it can be performed by the institution, if it's something that you don't feel comfortable with or unsure or you need some help, Jack Henry is here to help you as well. So if you open a case to the jXchange team and ask for their help in creating this external application, they can certainly walk you through that, just like we always have done today. I know I went through that really fast, and that's a pretty high level, but if you have any questions, you can always reach us. We do have an email inbox you can send requests to this developerrelations@jackhenry.com. If you are dealing with kind of a production support role, you can open a case in the For Clients portal. If you go to the jXchange product, just open a case there. Otherwise, if it's pretty high level, generic questions, anything that I covered today, you can reach out to us at developerrelations@jackhenry.com. I hope you found this useful. Please let us know if there's any questions you have or anything we can clarify better. Thank you.